Static Confessions. It wasn't thunder or wind that jolted the valley awake that night. It was a scream that cut through the radio feed. The voice listeners trusted fell silent, replaced by dead air, and then a sound no one could forget. For those who kept their radios on while drifting to sleep, it felt as if the darkness itself had cried out. The station sat on the edge of town, a brick building with an on-air light that burned like a beacon. The midnight host was a companion to truckers and insomniacs. He told stories and read letters with the warmth of someone who understood loneliness. He had a laugh that could make even the most mundane call feel like a confession worth hearing. On this stormy night, he was alone at the board. The crew had gone home early. At 1:47 a.m., according to the logs, he answered a call from an unlisted number. A woman's voice, tremulous and urgent, began to tell him about a teenage girl who vanished on the highway 20 years earlier. He listened more than he spoke. His voice, so used to filling silence, now hung back, as if he were afraid to disturb what she was opening. She described headlights behind the girl's car, a crash, and a dark shape dragging someone off the road. She said no one had been held accountable. "He never said sorry," she whispered. Instead of moving on, the host mentioned a 1999 news item about a missing student named Lily. He recited details, paint chips, skid marks, that many listeners didn't know. It was then that the broadcast dissolved into chaos. A muffled thud, a scrape, then a scream filled the valley, and then only static. People who had been half asleep sat up in bed, hearts racing, radios hissing on their nightstands. The storm hid the crime until dawn. When the producer arrived, she found the door bolted from inside. Through the glass, she saw him slumped over the console, a dark stain beneath his chin. The coffee was cold, the record was still spinning, and the phone handset swung gently. There were no broken windows or forced locks, only the humming equipment and the metallic smell of blood. Police searched the station inch by inch. The building had been a bank vault once, its walls thick enough to block sound. There were only two ways in, the front door and a heavy back door leading to an alley, both locked. Officers crawled through ducts and peered into the basement full of old microphones and tangled cables. They found no hidden passage, no footprints in the snow, no sign of anyone else inside. The coroner declared that the blow had been precise and fatal, delivered from behind. The knife was gone. So was the host's battered wristwatch, an heirloom he always wore. The time of death fell minutes after the call ended. Investigators combed through call logs and traffic cameras. The unlisted number pinged off a tower miles away and then vanished. No one recognized the voice. Rumors took on lives of their own. Some insisted the mysterious caller was the killer. Others pointed to an angry advertiser, a former bandmate, or a jealous lover. Every lead collapsed under scrutiny. Grief curdled into suspicion, then unease. The name Lily resurfaced. Older residents remembered a summer night when a teenager disappeared after leaving a bonfire. Her empty car had been pulled from the river. Whispers of paint chips from a dark sedan had been buried. Only the host had kept asking questions. Before he took the midnight slot, he'd been a reporter in a larger city. A story about a powerful developer's fraud ended his career. He came here to hide, to tell stories instead of chasing them. Yet he could not let go of Lily's disappearance. In his notebooks, police found dates and maps related to the case. He had called the retired officer who handled the investigation. He had even tried to speak to Lily's parents. To some, his curiosity now looked suspiciously like guilt. Weeks passed. The station played reruns, then fell silent. The sheriff's department and later state investigators ran down every thread. They found nothing. The on-air sign was turned off. Flowers wilted outside the door. People told each other not to listen for ghosts in the static. Months later, a teenage intern cleaning out the archive found an unmarked cassette behind a stack of tapes. On one side was the final hour of the broadcast, captured directly from the board. On the other was a much older conversation. The host's voice was there, younger and sharper. He was speaking to the retired officer. The date scribbled on the case was 2001. In the tape, the host pressed the officer to admit whether there had been evidence of another vehicle in Lily's accident. After a pause, the officer confessed there were paint chips from a dark sedan. The host went silent for a long moment. Then, barely audible, he said, "I drove a dark sedan then." The valley flared with speculation when that whispered admission from the old tape came to light. Some said the host had confessed to running Lily off the road. Others insisted he'd been baiting the retired officer for information. The sheriff reopened the file. The officer, when interviewed, hedged and claimed the reporter had been performing. No charges were filed. The case slid back into silence. The station building was sold, and the on-air light packed away. A furniture store took its place. For most people, the story became a local legend. A late-night host haunted by a ghost caller, a scream broadcast into bedrooms. The harder part, that two people had vanished into the same darkness, faded. But one listener could not let it go. They spent nights rewinding tapes, matching voices, mapping timelines. When they visited the retired officer in his nursing home, he admitted under his breath that paint chips on Lily's bumper came from a dark sedan. He admitted that the young reporter had whispered, almost to himself, that he'd driven such a car. The officer had thought it a rhetorical gambit. The studio had been carved out of a bank vault. Behind one wall was a crawl space running to a closet in the alley where night deposits were once made. By the time of the murder, a shelving unit hid the closet door. Police glanced at blueprints but assumed the passage unusable. A child who'd played in the building might have known otherwise. The person telling this story grew up there. Their sister, Lily, left for a party one sticky August night and never returned. Her empty car was found in the river. Adults told them she'd run away, or that fate had taken her. Years later, half asleep with a radio by their bed, they heard the midnight host treat Lily's fate like a ghost tale. Something in his voice made them sit up. They began to suspect that he knew more than he ever said on air. Years passed. Their suspicion curdled into certainty. They listened to every broadcast, collecting the way he lingered on certain details. They looked up his past and learned he had once driven a dark sedan. They learned that he had come to town the summer Lily vanished. They also remembered how to get into the old bank's crawl space. One winter, they borrowed a disposable phone and recorded a shaky monologue onto a tape, pitching their voice to disguise it. They timed their call for a stormy night when they knew he would be alone. They whispered into the phone about headlights and guilt. They heard his breathing change when he repeated facts about paint chips and skid marks, when he murmured that he had driven a dark sedan back then. They slipped into the alley, opened the hidden closet, and crawled through the passage. They emerged behind the studio wall. The scream that blasted across the valley was real. It was his. They took his watch because it had belonged to their father, and because seeing it on his wrist had been a spark for their rage. They went home, washed the blood off their hands, and watched as the town mourned the man who had made their sister into a story and left her in a river. They did not feel triumph. Taking a life, even a guilty one, left a hollow space where anger used to be. They kept the watch in a drawer. It ticked at night. Years passed. Guilt sat beside grief, neither wiping the other away. They also carried a secret that grew heavier each year. There were nights when they would tune into recordings of the host's old shows to hear the sound of his laugh. Sometimes they felt a flicker of the affection others had for him. Sometimes they imagined what might have happened if he had simply come forward and admitted his part in Lily's death. There were evenings when they walked past the former station and thought they could see the faint outline of the on-air sign reflected in the glass, as if time had folded in on itself. In those moments, they wondered whether they had become the very kind of story the host used to tell, one where sorrow and rage drive a person to the edge, and no one emerges unscathed. Telling this story now is not about satisfying curiosity. It is about acknowledging that the neat arcs of true crime shows rarely exist. The host was both a beloved voice and someone who took a life. The one who killed him was both a bereaved sibling and a murderer. The people of the valley were bystanders who let questions go unanswered. The storyteller feels a chill when they remember crawling through that dark passage. They share these details because secrets rot. Perhaps someone else, listening late at night, will hear their own anger reflected and choose a different path. The empty studio still stands on the edge of town. On some stormy nights, if you tune your radio just right, you might hear static. Maybe it's interference, maybe it's memory, or maybe it's the echo of a scream that once cut through the darkness and lingered. You've been listening to Dead Air, a not true crime production. See you next time.